This idea of Kundalini, it's been a very important part of my ongoing awakening process, as it has been for many others. And he comes back with a piece of paper, and it's a mental health crisis hotline. And I'm looking at this, and I'm like, I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. It is the Kundalini, once awakened, that begins to propel and support this evolutionary process. If you're familiar with the energy channels in the body, there's the main channel, which seems to be coinciding with the vagus nerve, Sushumna Nadi, up the spinal column. And then there's two that sort of intertwine around, which is Ida and Pingala, the other two nadis. Stereotypically, the awakening of Kundalini moves up Sushumna, and it goes to the head. There's different ways that it unfolds, and each of those ways bring about different qualities. Our different gifts and faculties and potential comes to the forefront of our consciousness, and we can use it to fulfill our mission and purpose. This is something deeper on the more fundamental level, and that's what this awakening process is about. It's at the core of who we are. We come here to go through this process.
This is completely inappropriate for me to say, and if I wasn't comfortable with you, I probably wouldn't say it. So thank you for the space you're holding. Adopting the identity of a spiritual teacher at a young age, bro.
Yeah.
Did you have any hang-ups around that, man? Like, what the
aside from my soul.
This week's episode is one on Kundalini awakening. Now, for me, Kundalini has always been a subject of taboo to some degree, because in India, we believe that it is a really sacred force, really powerful force. And so we had today on Brent Spirit, who talks all about Kundalini awakening. His perspective is that all awakening is actually Kundalini awakening, and to understand Kundalini rising and Kundalini Shakti particularly is very important, because then you can actually facilitate your journey of awakening along. So if you've ever been curious about the processes of awakening, if Kundalini has meant something to you but you don't know really what it's about, this could be an incredible conversation for you to dive into. This was quite revelatory for me as a conversation, recognizing the different tools that we have towards enlightenment and awakening on our path, and diving deep into Brent's work, like really setting ourselves for an orientation of enlightenment, and really why enlightenment is a goal that, you know, transcends all other goals really in this lifetime. There's no beating around it. I don't know how to put it any simpler. It's a really profound conversation for your soul, your spirit, your mind, your body, using the mind to go beyond the mind. Man, such a powerful conversation for your awareness to shift into, ultimately to ease and end suffering through the path of enlightenment. And a special shout out goes out to Ekta of Ekta Whisperings. She's got her own podcast called Ekta Whisperings. Ekta was the one that actually tuned me in to Brent Spirit's work, and this podcast would not have existed without you. And that goes out to all of you on the Inspired Evolution audience and tribe. And guys, if you guys have recommendations for the podcast, obviously you guys are loving these episodes, don't hesitate. Feel free to send in those recommendations to podcast@inspiredevolution.com. Ekta, thank you so much for this incredible conversation. Really appreciate you, Sister Bear, facilitating and just coordinating and calling in and, manifesting this conversation between Brent and I. Appreciate you sincerely, Sister. Hey there, Inspired Spirits. At the time of this recording, only 94% of you that are actually returning to watch a second or a third or a fourth video here on the Inspired Evolution podcast are actually subscribed. I can't tell you how much it genuinely helps everything we're trying to achieve with promoting positivity in the world through your subscription. Every time you hit subscribe, it helps us grow the platform. It lets guests that want to come onto the show know that, it is worth their time to take the time out to carve out a conversation like the ones that you're enjoying here on the Inspired Evolution podcast. My personal commitment to you is, as the show grows, more and more quality, more and more conversations, richer and richer things will flow around here. That is my absolute commitment to you. To be completely transparent, as we grow and when we finally get to that 100,000 subscriber mark, currently we do 2 episodes a week. I'm looking forward to getting us to about 3 episodes a week so we can really keep the juju going and flowing at an even greater level. And all of that is enabled by you taking the time to hit subscribe, hit that bell notification. So if you can, please take a moment, come on, take one quick sec, hit subscribe and hit that bell notification icon. It helps so much more than I can say. Thank you so much. Welcome back to the Inspired Evolution. And we have with us, inspiring our evolution in the true essence of inspired for our spirit, we have with us Brent Spirit. Brent, how are you there, brother?
I'm fantastic. Thank you. It's great to be here with you, Amrit.
Oh my God, it is such a pleasure to have you here. For those tuning in to Brent for the first time, you probably have tuned into him before because there is so much going on in, well, around awakening, around spirit, and we are all collective beings, but he's a spiritual teacher, intuitive support seeker, basically helping people on their journey of awakening, on their journey of enlightenment. He says helping people ascend into 5D heart-centered consciousness. To be honest, one of the big things that I find is there is so much mystery shrouding these processes that we have around awakening and self-realization. And Brent does an incredible job of literally, if I can say so myself, on his channel. Please do go check it out. I'll link it in the show notes below. Turning himself inside out. I would say, and being able to say, okay, this is somewhat what the process can look like, and really does an incredible job of holding space for there not being a one size fits all formula for everybody, and yet still being able to support people on their path and their journey towards awakening. Okay, I've turned that into a really long intro, but I really wanted to speak from the heart there. So welcome, Brent. Hopefully that aligns up to what you can see for yourself, or maybe, yeah, is that okay?
Yeah, it's good. A little bit of pressure, but we'll see what comes out.
Pardon me for the pressure. Then
No
I wanted
problem.
to start there today a little bit around, because I think the term awakening does actually get thrown around a lot, especially in today's common vernacular. There's a lot of people that, I found myself even actually being in that space. I struggled with depression for about 6 years, and then, I loosely saw the moment when I got diagnosed and got through treatment. Like, that whole process was a bit of an awakening for me. And I remember using the term awakening to describe what I went through in that process. And I look back now, and, maybe now because of the podcast, I've been exposed to so many different spiritual teachers and influences, that the term awakening has much greater depth to what it means to me. And for some people, they agree with that. Some people challenge that. We're awakening moment to moment. Your awareness around what the term awakening means, and to you specifically, and if you can describe awakening to us.
For sure. Well, I like to look at the most fundamental level. The word awakening seems to be a verb. And to me, a verb is something ongoing, right? So it's awakening. I'm awakening. I think it's important to discern between that verb and, I guess, the past tense, you could say, awakened, or the adjective, I should say, I am awakened, right? That seems to imply a sort of completion, and that can bring with it, of course, like you said, people can challenge you. Oh, how can you be awakened, or I am awakened and you're not, and they're awakened or they're not, and there's all of these judgments and comparisons happening within the space. So I like to say awakening is an ongoing process, and of course there can be many degrees of it. It's just an ongoing unfolding. It's an ongoing evolution, and we know that even if we make one evolutionary change, it's not I've evolved. That process continues. Now we're making the next and the next and the next. And so what I found on my journey, because maybe like yourself, looking at all of these terms, I got really caught up in trying to understand where I was on the journey. I knew I had gone through some shifts, some healing, some transformations. But was I awakened? I don't know. I felt a shift. Does this mean that's it? Maybe there'll be more. And if there's more, what does that mean? Am I double awakened? I didn't know. And so I then started looking at teachers, and they would describe their experiences, or some would teach but withhold their experience. And so I would wonder, what's going on in their world. And then maybe I would see a great teacher And I would see them go through another shift in a few years and write a new book about some new shifts. And I thought, what's going on here? There's something happening that isn't an absolute final crossing point. It must be an ongoing process. And that's what I like to say awakening is. It's ongoing. It's ongoing.
I love that, especially because at the heart of it, it then sort of untethers the ego and the mind from it, because the finite nature of the goals of the mind and the ego become immediately challenged and thrown back in the face of the ego and the mind, because it's like, okay, it's a process, gotta love the journey, and it's like, oh, but I want an outcome. It's an outcome. It's like, yeah, it already becomes untethered. Thank you so much for describing that, and yeah, with the grace as always. Yeah, I really love the way you describe things. From that point, I wanted to dive deeper into, because a lot of the conversation that you have, and you've got the website now, kundaliniawareness.org, is about bringing awareness to Kundalini. And so the term Kundalini awakening also is now becoming more and more commonplace in the common vernacular. And I'll put my hand up and sort of say, having Indian origins, there's a lot of there's a very different awareness. I feel like what the East carries around the term Kundalini and what the West carries as around the term Kundalini. Can you describe what Kundalini awakening means to you? And then maybe we can dive a little bit further into your origin story. Sorry, I'm trying to get the terms ironed out at the beginning, but I think it's important for us to set the stage in some context.
Of course. Yeah. So this idea of Kundalini, it's been a very important part of my ongoing awakening process, as it has been for many others. I can describe it in simple terms. Of course, Kundalini comes out of India. It's a Sanskrit term referring to a force said to have been coiled 3.5 times at the base of the human spine. And with spiritual practices, sometimes spontaneously as a result of maybe breath work, serious seeking, maybe intense prayer, trauma, psychedelics, plant medicine, encountering a great, powerful spiritual being, maybe a guru, for example, this coiled snake can begin to become uncoiled and can begin to rise up the spine. Now, the idea of a snake, it's of course not a literal snake. It seems to be a symbol, an archetype that is shown up all around, all around the world, depicting a force that seems to propel our evolution along. And so we're of course here on the Inspired Evolution podcast with Amrit, and I like to say that human beings, though many don't know this, that we're actually like we're actually like caterpillars, we're actually like tadpoles, where we can evolve into a new form. We can metamorphosize, we can transform within this one particular lifetime. So of course, many people would think of evolution as, unfolding over many generations with the process of natural selection and whatnot. But I would say, well, actually, we are like a caterpillar. Many of us don't know it. And it is the Kundalini, once awakened, that begins to propel and support this evolutionary process, which leads to ongoing awakening, where we are able to abide in a meditative state of consciousness, very present, very alert. Some of our different gifts and faculties and potential comes to the forefront of our consciousness, and we can use it to fulfill our mission and purpose. So this, in general, the basic idea of Kundalini. Now, around what I've shared, many experts will say, well, you should have used this term, or it should have been this way or that way, and maybe it's a little bit more nuanced than that, and it completely is. And so you mentioned my website, kundaliniawareness.org. The intention behind that website is to raise more awareness about this process and to get more conversations going. And on the website itself, I've defined Kundalini in a similar way to what I just shared, but underneath my very general overview, I have a list of definitions that seem to vary greatly from many different authors and doctors and people that have lived this. So they're speaking about it in their own way, with their own cultural, religious, or spiritual a spin and take on things. Ultimately, it is something that is becoming more and more common because more and more people are going through this process. And so this is why the conversation is growing. And there's, of course, a lot of confusion around it because it's quite literally at the leading edge of our evolution. And so we're entering into our uncharted territory here, really, as a collective species. And so this is why it's just so exciting to me as well. It's just so exciting.
Is it safe to say that going through the Kundalini awakening process is an enlightening process? Can I draw parallels to that, or is that too gross of a statement to make?
I think that's it's quite an accurate statement, I would say. Of course, this can be argued, but in my view, when I look at any of the people who we may consider to be enlightened from past or present, it seems that they underwent a process akin to Kundalini awakening. Now, it varies greatly for many people. Sorry, I just some people describe this very dramatic energy, snake-like explosion up their spine, and it brings about this very expansive state of consciousness and sort of that thing. And that we would say, of course, that's Kundalini. But then others have a very gentle, gradual, subtle process that doesn't have this huge explosion. And so both we would say is Kundalini process. Some are more intense and obvious, some are more subtle. And that's what makes it a little tricky. And that's actually why I think some people may say we don't need Kundalini to get enlightened. It's because the traditions and the teachers and the general figures from the paradigms that they're into maybe didn't have a huge dramatic unfolding, but it's there in Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism in particular does have some pretty direct conversations around it, but it seems to be all over. If I can boil it down even further, it's an energetic transformation that coincides with the awakening process that takes place across the entire system, head to toe. If I can boil it down even further, that's what I would say.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you about the awakening. Because, well, let's just ask it now so I don't lose it. Because a lot of when we start talking about awakening, we start talking about enlightenment, obviously there's a lot of philosophy in that space. And when we start talking about philosophy, it's great little, well, maybe it's more than this. It is more than this. I'm going to sound rude, but I can see the little puppy mind of mine just chewing on the bone, and it loves to sort of gnaw on the nub. And it can be such great fodder for the mind to chew on. But when I feel into the depths of your work, it is a consistent reminder that actually the invitation that it's beyond the mind and it's more than the mind. Parts of it are a body as a system as well. Can you describe some of that before I start putting words in your mouth incorrectly and making a fool of myself as well?
No, I think you got it right. The mind is a very powerful tool, of course. However, I cannot use my mind to carry out some of the most basic functions of my body. Growing hair, digesting food, I can't. And those are very important and complex processes that the body seems to take care of. And so that seems to imply that there is an intelligence within us that isn't the mind. It's something a little bit more subtle than that. And for the record, I'm discerning between mind and brain. So some would say the brain is what carries out digestion and whatnot. But we could argue that as well. It seems that there's more signals being sent from the body to the brain than the brain to the body across the vagus nerve. And so the body seems to have its own intelligence. And so what I say is that it is that intelligence that digests food, heals cuts, grows hair, puts an individual through puberty, develops the fetus into a full-blown baby in a pregnant person. It's that same intelligence that then steps into a new phase, which facilitates the evolutionary process of awakening and moving towards enlightenment. And that's what we may call Kundalini awakening. So Kundalini, some would say it's always active in us. In its coiled up dormant state, it just takes care of the basic mundane processes of the body, digestion, food, etc. But when it's awakened, then it says, oh, now it's time. Let's step it up. It's kind of like a adolescent entering to puberty. The body says, all right, now it's time. Let's start making some changes. So I also like to say that Kundalini awakening process is very similar to puberty.
Mm. When you're describing it that way, some part of me, you're saying that there's an intelligence that's always present with us. Is it not too dissimilar to life force energy, just the ever-present life force energy, or am I drawing parallels which shouldn't be drawn?
No, I think that's a very valid parallel. Life force energy. So we refer to sometimes Kundalini as a force that I think I was using that wording earlier, a force that propels the evolution of our individuality forward. Energy is also not a bad term at all. I use it often, but I have heard some people say, actually, hey, careful. It's not exactly an energy. It's as if it's a separate energy from everything else. So if we look at the full term out of yoga, it's Kundalini Shakti, actually. It's what they refer to it as, Kundalini Shakti. And so Shakti is spiritual force. It is the energetic power of consciousness. And Shakti isn't limited to just our body. It's the entire world is Shakti, actually. Of course, we can see it especially in nature. That's Shakti. But it's also in inanimate objects as well. It's all there is, really. It's the dance of consciousness. But when it's coiled up and concentrated with a very specific purpose in the base of a human spine, then we put that prefix and we say it's Kundalini Shakti. So yes, it absolutely is life force energy.
Hey, you're Inspired Tribe. I want to take a quick sec. I wanted to share something today with you that is really dear to my heart, and it's actually what keeps the entire ecosystem around the Inspired Evolution thriving, my one-on-one coaching. So it's basically coaching that helps you live a spiritually aligned life. I coach people from all different types of walks of life. These people are leaders and they're looking to have an incredible spiritual impact in the lives that they're leading for themselves, and then also lead in alignment to their values. Now, you don't have to take my word for it. Here's a few people that have also transformed through my coaching, and here's what they have to say.
Amrit is a fantastic coach.
In a few sessions, he got to a depth that I'd only experienced before working with certain medicines.
He's gone through a lot of the struggles that you're probably facing.
Then my corporate banking job wasn't really doing it.
You feel like you're not making progress towards your goals.
And Amrit's been a really strong, supportive figure in my journey.
I'm more in control of myself.
I'm kinder to myself.
I actually have that vision and a purpose.
I do feel like I'm a better version of myself already.
Amazing energy.
He was easy to talk to, which made me easy to trust him.
Working with Amrit at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and really I was bouncing out of bed.
Whenever I get off the calls with Amrit, best money we've ever spent.
I would not recommend him because I don't want everyone to know about him and then I won't be able to book him. If he gets too busy, I won't get my turn.
I would say absolutely.
There's no way you can work with Amrit for a period of time without being transformed.
So if you're considering him as a coach, do not hesitate, because you won't be disappointed.
As you guys can see, there's a lot of people all over the world from all these different corners experiencing incredible transformations. I don't think, if I can say humbly myself, that there is anything quite like this somewhere else online. Most people that, have channels that, grow and grow and grow don't really focus on one-to-one offerings. I have just found that it is the most profound space where you can bring yourself in a private container and really just share what's going on for yourself. And if you want to book in for that call with me, touch base, it's www.amrit.coach/life. That's www.amrit.coach/life. There is a link in the show notes below to book in that call. And yeah, if you want to take your journey further, if you want to dive in deeper, and you really want to live a spiritually aligned life, if it's for you, please do check it out. And without too much further ado, once again, for your spirit, for yourself, today's podcast. Okay, so from that point, having been on the podcast for quite some time, the Inspired Evolution journey, I often see that people create from a really wholesome space and become somewhat notorious in their spaces. I should say great, not notorious. Become great in their space when they're sort of scratching the itch that, the hero's journey is a common story arc, I guess, that most beings live out. And, just tuning into how much your work is dedicated to helping people become more aware of the process, have more dialogue around this sort of stuff. I'm imagining, and maybe I'm foolishly imagining, that, you know, when you were going through your processes, that there probably wasn't the support that you were hoping was there. Is that too drastic an assumption for me to make? And if so, can you describe some of your processes? Because I've felt into some of them, but yeah, you know, it's not, like we said, awakening is an ongoing process. Can you describe a little bit around your own journey for us? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It was definitely the hero's journey. When I discovered the hero's journey, I said, "Oh my God, this map, this makes so much sense." And what I've understood, if I could go back to this idea of awakening being ongoing, I'm sure you and your listeners are aware they depict the hero's journey as a circle. I see it actually as a spiral. So we just keep going round and round and round and keep going. And so it's an ongoing process, the hero's journey. And so this began for me in the most obvious way, looking back in hindsight. At 15, I think we have very similar stories. I was, depressed and anxious. And at that point, I had completely turned away from any sort of woo-woo stuff, you could say, religion, spirituality. That was all, to me at that time, just complete nonsense. Conveniently, I was also depressed and anxious at the time with no, spiritual support system, you could say. But then I learned, of course, there's, meditation and mindfulness through, like you, Eckhart Tolle's work. So that work really opened me up to a whole new world. That began my awakening process, you could say. I sat to meditate in stillness for the first time after having practiced Eckhart's work about, being mindful, being present throughout our day. I thought, let me try this thing, sitting quietly. And so I sat down, and suddenly, as soon as I turned inward, my spine began to just move, and my neck was going like this and that. And it was happening involuntarily. And I really couldn't tell you what it was. I just thought, well, something is like taking control of my body. And I opened my eyes and it stopped. And I said, okay, that's not for me. I don't know what that was. Meditation, not for me. And it was at the time not notable. I didn't tell anybody about it. I didn't Google it. It was just like this thing that happened. And I just went on about my life. That was 15. So, of course, the practices still were so important to me of practicing active meditations and mindfulness throughout my day and whatnot. So that really brought me out of depression, brought me out of anxiety. And I came to, of course, learn about the East and Buddhism and Hinduism and yoga and how it's all based around this. And then, of course, you come to find it's there in the West, too, in Christianity, in mystical Judaism, and even in Islam and Sufism. It's all there. So I thought, whoa, they're talking about presence, awareness, consciousness, these expansive states of being. And I thought, this is all I'm going to do for the rest of my life. This is my life. It's this path. Relationships, work, anything else, it will all fall under this umbrella of this path. So that was for the first few years of my journey in my teenage years. Over time, and I'm happy to get into it if there's any specific questions you have, but over time, this awakening energy of, now we understand, was Kundalini that was actually moving my spine, began to become more and more intense. And in fact, after I attended my first meditation retreat, which was a 10-day Vipassana retreat with Goenka, about 6 months later, there was this huge inpouring of energy into my head from above that followed a very sincere practice of self-inquiry. I was asking questions like, who am I? What is true? What is the nature of reality? Very much these psychological, cerebral, spiritual practices. And at one moment, it was like my head opened up and this huge rush of energy came into my head. And it was like my awareness expanded to the ends of the universe. And I could witness my thoughts in my mind. And I thought, I'm looking at this mind, and I tried to look for me, Brent, and there was no Brent there. There was just an empty space, and a thought would arise, and then that thought would disappear, and then another thought, and then that would disappear. And that was all that was happening in the mind. And that's all that was ever happening. And that's all that will ever happen. And I thought, there's no Brent there. There's just empty space and one thought arising one at a time. So this was, of course, now looking back, I can say this was the realization of no self. At the time, it was interesting. And I thought, okay, this is spiritual. This is what they're talking about in Buddhism and in some neo-Advaita non-duality circles. But then I looked around at the world, and suddenly the world was the same way. It was like an illusion. It didn't exist. It was just particles arising and passing away. And so this was very spooky for me. And I looked at my parents and I thought, well, if there's no Brent, well, of course there's nobody there either. They have the same mind as me. It's just a thought arising and passing away. This was horrifying. But then I started to read some of the Advaita Vedanta texts. I started to read Zen Buddhism and said, well, this is what they're all talking about. So this must be a very clear, significant awakening experience I'm having. But it felt very uncomfortable because I didn't know how to operate in this space. So I'll pause here and just say that though earlier on I did describe Kundalini as being coiled at the base of the spine, rising upwards in the spinal column, don't mean to throw your audience for a loop, but it can also happen as an inpouring of energy, which some would refer to as a top-down awakening. Sometimes we see in Christianity, there's these ideas of the Holy Spirit descended upon me. The grace of God came over me from above. And so just to clear up any questions about up or down, I like to say this is God, this is the divine, and the divine can move in any direction, not just up, not just upwards, downwards, left, right. The divine can move in all directions. And so that was the first sort of major awakening experience that I had. And to your question, about support, well, I didn't know who to turn to because I didn't know how to express this. The people that were talking about this online seemed to just be very cold about it and say, yeah, this is all it is. This is not as emptiness. There's no one. There's nobody here. So all there is awareness. And I thought, okay, I can see that. But like, I feel like when I'm talking to somebody that I care about, it's like I'm talking to them from 1,000 miles away. It's just this very distant place. And so I went to, I tried to talk to everybody I could talk to, yoga teachers. I had a Buddhist studies professor. I said, look, I'm experiencing what I believe to be no self, what you were talking about in the lecture. And she says, I can't help you with this. I just teach it. I don't actually practice. And so I was like, oh my God, I don't know who to talk to because this is far out stuff. And so for the next little while, I eventually was able to sort of return back into my body because this awakening opened up my head so far. It was like I left my body. It was like I was floating above it. Eventually, I began to return back into my body. And that's when, like we were describing earlier, the rest of this awakening process began to take place from the rest, from my feet upwards now, which brought a lot of emotional purification and purging as well.
And you've been very gracious in describing your emotional processes at that point on in some videos on your channel as well. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. It's interesting because you were going through these processes and I guess it must have been quite disconcerting. Like at some point, I'm not sure if you felt like you were going crazy or not. And what was going on in there? Like, was there just full trust in the process? Or did you feel, because it sounds like the processes were quite alien and you were feeling alienated. Human beings' experience is meant to be shared somewhat, right? We are all one in this whole. Yeah. Did your relationship with your mind at the time?
Yeah. So this was in 2012, which though these conversations were being had, back then, they weren't being had as much and openly as they are now. So even back then, it was not so easy to find information. On top of that, it was so foreign and unusual, and it's nothing like you could have ever imagined. Even if you've read about it, even if you have a guide with you, you have an experience like that, you will 100% say, wow, this is not what I thought it would be. And so I did think that I was going crazy, actually. And so there were some great blessings from the universe, I would say, that's helped me to develop trust, like you were asking about. So in this course I was taking, which was an intro to Buddhism in my undergrad, I didn't do any of the readings because I was really just committed about this spiritual path, my own practice. I was reading my own books. In fact, like I said, it was 2012. I quite literally thought the world was going to end on December 21st. And I thought the only chance I have to survive or whatever was if I could just make some spiritual transformations very quickly.
The end of
so
the
I was
Mayan
all
calendar?
in on that stuff. Yeah. The end of the Mayan calendar marked, of course, like a shift in our accelerated awakening, but nobody really could say what exactly was going to happen. So I thought the world might end. I don't know why this idea really took me, like really had a grip on me. But anyway, I wasn't doing any of the readings in this course. And I'm sitting there in this dreamlike state, just total emptiness. And I just opened the textbook to a random page, and I see this brief description of something that they describe as Zen sickness. And so they just say that Zen sickness, also referred to as emptiness sickness, sometimes monks that have been meditating very intensely experience this experience where they, feel like they're trapped in emptiness, stuck in the void. There was a Zen master by the name of Hakuin. He actually wrote about his experiences, and he describes being stuck in the ice cave of emptiness. It's a very cold type of experience. And I thought, this is exactly what I'm going through. This is what I'm experiencing. And so finding that in the book randomly, that I never read, never had any intention of reading, I just opened to this page. I said, okay, something is guiding me here. This is pretty interesting synchronicity or something. So I said, okay. The next experience that I had was that I wasn't crazy was I went to a Zen center in Toronto. And I remember riding the bus there and just being completely out of my body, really freaked out. I arrive at the Zen center. I don't know what their hours are. I really have no idea what they're about. But I just thought, Zen sickness, Zen center, hopefully somebody there can help me. I knock on the door, and I guess it's a member of the community, but not a teacher, not a Zen master. And I say, look, man, I think I'm dreaming. I don't know what's happening. I was meditating and this started happening to me. I need some help. Is there somebody I could talk to? And he says, well, the teacher doesn't just accept anybody off the street to come and talk to them. You have to be part of our community and all that sort of stuff. And I said, okay, that I understand. And then he says, give me 1 second. And he comes back with a piece of paper, and it's a mental health crisis hotline. And I'm looking at this, and I'm like, I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. This is a spiritual process. I just have to find the right people, and maybe they will continue to find me. The messages, the words, the books, whatever will find me, like how I came across the term Zen sickness. And so like that, I came across great teachers like Shinzen Young speaking about, Zen sickness, also called depersonalization, derealization. It seems very similar, if not the same thing, those experiences that some people have. And so that's how I began to develop trust that I was taken care of. That small little thing. And then, of course, it just unraveled. And now my trust is so deep. I have 1,000 different stories of how I'm taken care of by the universe. And so that just continued to unfold.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a moment because we're at a unique opportunity. Thank you so much for sharing that, brother. Where you described that moment where you're looking at the mental health and there's a deep knowing that you're not, you haven't lost the plot, you're going through a spiritual process. And, oftentimes in spiritual circles, we talk about intuition, and I think it's really profound, and it's one of my favorite spaces to dive into actually in conversation and actually relate to and from is an intuitive space. and I'm still looking for the terminology, but I think we're at a juncture right now in this conversation where we can shine a light on it. This deep knowing, it's deeper than intuition, and many of us carry this. And I think it's available to everybody in some degrees. Maybe I'm being, fat-fingered when I sort of use that approach. So I'm conscious about my terminology. But, I get people rocking up to coaching and they go, I know I'm made for more. And it's like, yeah, but your life's great on the outside. I'm like, no. Like, why disrupt it? There's a deep inner knowing. And in that moment, it seemed like, there's a deep inner knowing that, hey, what I'm going through is on my path. It's not like veered me off. The quality and the texture of that deep knowing is hard to really describe, but we're at a juncture where we can sort of just shine a little bit of a light on it. And I think yourself, having been doing this work for quite some time, I guess just an opportunity for us to riff on it in conversation, like your relationship with what I'm alluding to, Touchwood, and your awareness of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I can use the comparison of women who are pregnant and going through childbirth. They have a deep knowing of how to go through that process. There may be some complications along the way. They may need assistance, and there's no harm in seeking assistance and conversing about it. But deep down, we hear all the time of women having babies in the car, alone, at home, and they just push through and make it through because there's this deep wisdom that knows how to carry out these very primal processes. And I think this evolutionary process of awakening is like childbirth, like puberty. We don't need to know anything intellectual about it. It's this deeper knowing that is it's in our software, it's in our hardware, it's written and coded into our DNA. And so there are great books and we can have the conversations about it. But like you said, some people in their DNA coded is the archetypes. I know I'm meant to do something more. I'm meant to be an artist. I'm meant to be a warrior. I'm meant to be of service, meant to be a parent. And they know that. And it's not even intuitive, because intuitive, I think, is even more surface level. This is something deeper on the more fundamental level. And that's what this awakening process is about. It's at the core of who we are. We come here to go through this process. Whether we all get to this point or not, of course, not everybody, but it's there. And if it gets started, there's something that's going to drive it. And I like to say, of course, that intelligence is the Kundalini Shakti, but we can talk about it in so many different ways, of course.
Because that was going to be one of my questions today, was not so much, is this for everybody? But is it available to everybody, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it is available to everybody. Of course, not everybody will come to a point where they're interested or ready or drawn to this type of material or ripe enough for that energy to begin to move through the system. But it's not limited just to Indian people that do yoga. It's universal and human, and so we see it across the entire world throughout history. The Indians and the yogis have done a great job of articulating it quite well, but we see it in Buddhism in some more lesser known, less obvious ways. It's there. The Buddhists speak of a practice called tumo, which is the cultivation of heat in the body. It seems very similar to the Kundalini process, in my view. Of course, Christians speak of the Holy Spirit. This is what they're talking about. It's all over. And so it's not limited just to one particular group of people. And I see it across the board. I've seen people that, are saintly people that do incredible just serving and giving, and they have an awakening. And I see people who would say, man, I have no idea. I don't know anything about this. I'm an addict. I'm done bad things. Why is this happening to me? It's just happening all over the place to people because certain people are coming to a point in their journey where it's just time. And that point looks different for everybody. For some people, it doesn't get triggered through spiritual practice. It's just their time, and it just happens to them. And it can be, of course, make them feel like they're going crazy, for sure.
Is it something that you think that some people will experience, like, are actually meant to experience in this particular lifetime and other people aren't? I guess the question's loosely based around destiny, which is such a big conversation. But yeah, just loosely just asking that question, I guess, without it being such a heavy hitting one.
No, I love that question, and I know it's a question that you've brought up within other conversations. In my view, if I go back to this experience I had when I described no self, just awareness with thoughts arising one at a time, the most fundamental level, there's nobody there to control anything. It's all happening on its own. This is all destiny unfolding. And so I go to that place of no self in our conversation here just because it feels right. But that's not a place that I teach from often. If people come to me and say, Brent, I'm hurting, I say, let's sit with that pain and let's look at it. I don't say, hey, there's nobody there to hurt, so what are you talking about? Just as a caveat to that point. But in the higher perspective, I see that this is a very perfectly orchestrated divine unfolding carrying itself out. And it's done so masterfully that we get to even pretend that we are in control and have that experience. But if we observe, there's a lot of reason to consider that there's something else running the show. I mean, synchronicity implies that. The idea of no self implies that. I can't really control much in my body, digesting food, etc. I like to say that I can consciously inhale and exhale. I can do that a few times. Eventually, my will get tired. I'll give up, and the breathing will continue on its own. So I have a little bit of will, but it's very limited and not even necessary. But to that point, and I will address your general question there. I know destiny, free will. I love this conversation, but to that point, like I like to say, if a person is operating as if they have free will and a separate sense of self and an ego, and by all means operate from that place, you must. But if you're beginning to enter into these stages of the journey where the lines get blurred between what's me and what's the world, and what's me and what's the universe and God, and that begins to blur, and you can sort of enter the flow now and then and just let destiny handle things, and that's surrender. But are some people destined to go through Kundalini awakening, spiritual awakening? I think so, yes. Some people they are, and they can't escape it. You could be an atheist, you can be a terrible person, you can be whatever. Not that atheists are terrible people, two separate things there, but you don't have to be a saint and a spiritual person that prays and stuff. It can happen to you if it's just part of what's you could say written in your fate. And so if it's not, there's nothing that's going to make it happen either. And what I've found, generally speaking, is those that are in this vicinity, it's like a vortex, it's just calling them in. And once you get even a little bit in touch with this idea of awakening and Kundalini, it's only time. It's only time. It will consume you in your life, whether you want it to or not. And so, and if it's not in your destiny, you'll hear these terms and you'll scroll away. You'll ignore it. It'll go in one ear and out the other.
Yeah, I'm conscious that I've got a smile on my face. It's like you're describing these deep processes, and the part of me that's laughing is actually laughing at the grips of my own mind as it's listening to you speak of no mind. And it's like, yeah, it's I get to laugh at myself. So part of me, if my facial expressions are a bit inappropriate. At what point did you recognize, and maybe you can describe that, this journey that, because I think a lot of us are, operating from when we are in the space of the mind, and maybe this is going backwards a few steps, that there are all these material goals to achieve and things to have and even people to be. And yourself being a young man, de-identifying from success in some ways and then reorienting yourself towards, enlightenment being a goal. Yeah, can you step us through that a little bit? Like, why would enlightenment be, I don't want to, well, I do actually kind of want to make this statement, but I don't want to sound like that. Enlightenment being the only worthy goal to work towards in some ways. Can you describe that?
Yeah. So I think we have to come to a point on our journey. If we were going to use the word enlightenment, I think we can look at the Buddhist paradigm a little bit here. We have to come to a point in our journey where we do recognize suffering. And once you see suffering for what it is, and that life is suffering, everything else just becomes like, it's just so obvious that it's just not important. And the thing is that for most people, they just are fortunate or unfortunate, however you'd like to look at it, to not see the truth that life is suffering, that even getting what you want will bring suffering, right? For those who see that, I think that sparks the inevitable, which is, well, I have to figure out how to no longer experience the suffering. And so chasing success and whatnot, though important and part of our purpose in being grounded, it's what we're here to do in some respects. The idea that it will fulfill us, that's just like, it's completely seen as a scam. And so all that's left is the path. All that's left is the path. Should everybody move towards that? I don't think so. I think we're all on our journeys, and some people are meant to explore. And when they come to the point where they're done exploring, then they'll maybe see like, okay, none of this is really going to fulfill me totally. So now they may begin to move inwards. But I don't think it's something to force upon everyone. It's just for those who see what's really going on here, and that not getting what you want makes you suffer. Getting what you want makes you suffer because it's short-lived. It'll leave. Well, what's left then? Well, we have to move towards the awakening process.
Yeah, and this becomes really interesting because at this point, and I'm sorry to project on you so hard, but it sounds like this is completely inappropriate for me to say, and if I wasn't comfortable with you, I probably wouldn't say it. So thank you for the space you're holding. But it sounds like, because so much of what you describe from the Buddhist perspective, like suffering is living, then it also sounds like with that awareness that you're carrying, having transcended, like transcended is very absolute, but having transcended some, or let's just articulate it softer, some of the suffering, there's almost this, maybe it's just my ego that's confronted by it and the mind, which then goes, it feels somewhat dead because so much of living is attached to suffering in some ways, right? Touch wood. And that can be quite confronting for the mind to face. And yeah, just, can you speak to that? Can you help unpick that a little bit? Because I know from your work you've described, and maybe I'm going 2 questions in too fast, but the layers that are available when you do go a little bit further. Sorry, I've almost asked 2 questions.
Yeah, no, that's great. They coincide, and they give me an idea of how I can speak about it. When we speak of layers, we can think of the chakra system. And so there are, of course, we know that the 3, you could say, worldly chakras. The root chakra has to do with survival. Sacral chakra has to do with reproduction. Solar plexus, the will to accomplish these things. As we move up the spinal column in a sort of course, overgeneralized way, that's the journey of the spiritual, the person on the spiritual path is moving up the spinal column towards the higher energy centers. It's not that the worldly purpose becomes dead. It's just that something new becomes alive. And so we still handle the worldly stuff. It's just that we see this is not truly fulfilling, and it never was meant to be. It never was meant to be. That's what dies, is the belief that this was meant to be fulfilling. We see it never was. Of course, we see this like, there's more to us here. I didn't just come like an animal to just survive, to find a cave, make myself comfortable, and just, conserve as much energy as possible. I didn't come here to do that. I didn't just come here to have sex. In the moment, it may feel like it's, what we came here to do, give it some time, and then, you want to get out in the world and do other things. And so if we see, okay, of course, that can't be the whole thing. So as we move higher and higher into the energy centers, we start to come towards, of course, the Sahasrara, 7th chakra, crown chakra. This is God. the divine, and we move there, and we see that this, of course, is very much alive. It's all the life that we see, and so it's not that it becomes dead and then there's just death. I think you could say it becomes dead, but then something else comes alive out of that space.
Thank you so much for articulating that. Yeah, that's really, really helpful. One of the questions I've got, and this bugs me no end. Sorry for throwing all my annoyance at you in one fell podcast swoop. But the connotations of, you described earlier in your journey that, you were reading these Advaita Vedantic texts, that we got it out of my mouth, and, going along this journey to better understand the nature of the mind. And a lot of what you're describing, to me, humbly, I see it as going beyond the mind. And I see this sort of paradoxical loop. And now I guess there's been enough on the Inspired Evolution where I kind of embrace the paradoxes now, because I see, the paradoxes exist because I'm coming from the mind, and reality exists in many paradoxical ways, and it's great and it's perfect, and I'm probably reaching a frontier on my mind which it can't cross, and maybe crack open into some wisdom beyond the intellect, or open into spirit. But one of the paradoxes, right here, if you join me at this frontier, just for the moment, which is trying to use the mind to understand some of these concepts, as we're doing even in this conversation right now, to then tip beyond the mind, and it's this real, what got me here surely won't get me there, but it's all I've got, and so I'm using it to get me there. Can you describe the paradox between it being the path, but also it being completely futile in the same breath?
For sure. Yeah. So, you're right. In some respects, it's all we've got, and it's what we have to use. And that's why there are so many great spiritual texts that we're meant to, read and process intellectually. We could argue that there's an underlying energetic transmission in some of those texts as well, but we won't go there right now. But yeah, we can look at these texts and make sense of some of the things that we're experiencing on the mental level. And eventually, the idea is that we develop an intellectual understanding about those concepts. And then when the time is right, it shifts from intellectual understanding to spiritual realization, which happens on the experiential level, not the intellectual level. And so I think Ramana Maharshi, he had this question, self-inquiry. The question is, who am I? And he describes that question as a tool similar to using a branch to stoke a fire. Eventually you throw that branch into the fire as well. So even the mind is used to inquire into the nature of mind, and then eventually the mind is also thrown into that fire and dissolved. Way back when this was happening to me, I had a very sort of interesting metaphor of this, where I was eating at a restaurant. I was in a university restaurant. So they gave us like porcelain plates and then plastic cutlery. And so I was, scraping the scraps of my food into the garbage with the plastic cutlery. And then when I was done, I threw the plastic fork in the garbage as well. And I thought, oh, that's the same thing. And so just another interesting metaphor of how we use the mind to also go beyond the mind. Eventually, the mind also gets blasted open into a state of no mind. Now, this can also happen in other ways as well, as a result of just allowing that Kundalini energy to move through the body. Eventually, it makes its way into the head, and many people describe just spontaneously, without engaging in a practice like I did, self-inquiry, or engaging in a sort of maybe like a koan, like Zen Buddhism. Instead of doing that, they just suddenly have this sort of realization of like, I don't know, where's the ego? It's just gone. It never was there. And they're like examining the reality of the situation with new lens, with new eyes. And that's another way that it can happen when the energy makes its way into the head and starts to sort of transform the way that we, have our cognitive experience of the world and ourselves. That also goes through a shift as a result of this energy.
I have this really trippy awareness to some degree that human beings are much more like lemmings than we give ourselves credit for, and that we're walking around as antenna. And, you know, we're basically primed a certain way, whether we're watching heaps of news or whether we're, you know, expressing heaps of gratitude. We sort of prime the antenna a certain way to pick up certain channels that are in the ether and the frequencies around us, and that influences our thoughts a lot more than we give it credit for. It's just my awareness around certain things. Not everybody has to buy into that. But then in this particular juncture where we are in this conversation, is it safe to sort of say the using the mind to go beyond the mind? I love the metaphor of throwing the stick back in, you throwing your plastic cutlery back in the bin as well. Is it also am I on the right path potentially believing that somewhat it is a case of priming as well, priming the being a certain way to be ready for the work? Like, could you see it that way? Or is it not quite like that?
Yeah. So there is a degree of priming ourselves for it, though not everybody needs to be primed to the same degree. So some people, they can have just they may just ask, who am I, this one time, and like they have this realization. Whereas other people, they have to commit to it with a great intensity. It all depends on where they're at. Sometimes they're just at the right place at the right time for that realization to come in. And so we unfortunately can't rely on a spontaneous awakening. If you're aware of the path, you have to walk it. And we can't say, well, my friend had a spontaneous awakening, maybe that'll happen to me, so I won't do anything about it. I think once you're aware of the path and what this is about, you just naturally start practicing, and that's what's priming the system, priming the mind, the body for all of this to take place.
I guess at this particular juncture, I'd be remiss to not ask what some of the basic everyday practices are that you recommend for people to, just start to invite themselves to be primed. Just in case some of us are thinking sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So, just an opportunity to get your insights on what you believe can be supportive on the path.
For sure. Yeah. So in my work, because I tend to attract people that are going through very challenging spiritual awakening processes with a lot of very active Kundalini, sort of explosions of Kundalini that bring up a lot of emotions, a lot of weird, trippy sort of psychic phenomena, all that kind of stuff. My message to everybody, but in particular those going through challenging awakenings, is to focus on self-care in the most basic ways that the most grounded worldly people would say. So rather than focusing on which combination of crystals and all this kind of stuff, it's just eating well, moving the body, resting well, socializing, catching up with friends, and not talking about super far out spiritual stuff. That's what I would say to those going through the really extreme awakening processes. And those are very spiritual practices, believe it or not. Self-care, eating well, going for walks, socializing, resting, very spiritual. They can be, of course. Beyond that, meditation, I'm sure you know, I know you know, it's just life-changing. Even for those not interested in awakening, it will just enhance every dimension of life gets enhanced. And this is measurable. Science has proven it. Everybody should be practicing meditation to some degree or another. I don't force that on people because I know it's difficult. It's been difficult for me to commit, but of course, can't argue it anymore. Everybody should meditate. Not intensely, not saying 3-4 hours a day, but just 10 minutes a day. It makes a big difference in itself. That and then I think hanging out with people that have come to certain points on the path that you would like to also come to yourself. So when I say hanging out, I mean like spending time with you on your podcast, listening, reading books, connecting with those friends. We know it's common knowledge. You're the product of the 5 people you spend the most time with, yada yada, right? So just being in the vicinity of these people. What's interesting is, of course, the conversations are so meaningful, but there's an energetic component to this as well that happens beyond the words. it's the transmission of presence, like, Eckhart Tolle would say, the transmission is happening, and it's happening between the words. It's happening when you read a text that's really supercharged and written by somebody in a very high place. You read it, and if you're sensitive, you can pick up on it. And so what I did on my path was I basically said, I'm not going to listen to anybody who doesn't have what I'm looking for. And so before exploring any of their work or reading any of their books, I did a little bit of investigation. How far are they on their path? What level are they speaking from? I just tried to discern this. And I found that there were some people who were so advanced, and this was great. And then there were other people who were like pundits. They were like intellectuals. And they were great at maybe deciphering the nuances of the Sanskrit language and translating it, but they didn't have any personal direct experience. So those people I weeded out. People that had comments about the spiritual path that never really practiced meditation, never had any deep experiences about it, I tuned them out. I didn't care who they were, how smart they were. I just tuned them out. And I only hung out with people that were on the path. And that made all the difference, because all the noise then disappeared. And it was just like I was steeped in people walking this path. And that made a very big difference for the intellect, but also energetically as well.
And I imagine also your belief systems getting rewired, even just in the 3D as you're spending time, the mind, just your system believing what's possible, right, reshapes so much of that. And I love that, because we've come to this juncture in the conversation where, yes, meditation is this incredible practice, but also what you've described as this pillar of self-inquiry within the self, who am I? And carrying this self-inquiry. And I will ask just one more question in regards to that, but then also, in the external world, having these, inspiration points, role models, however you want to describe it, people that inspire you on your path, inspired evolution, obviously, a little bit that way, but people that inspire you on your path to then, have that non-verbal transmission as well, that then influences so much within your system, and then also the work within your system. Hey, your Inspired Tribe, I want to take a quick sec. I wanted to share something today with you that is really dear to my heart, and it's actually what keeps the entire ecosystem around the Inspired Evolution thriving, my one-on-one coaching. So it's basically coaching that helps you live a spiritually aligned life. I coach people from all different types of walks of life. That these people are leaders, and they're looking to have an incredible spiritual impact in the lives that they're leading for themselves, and then also lead in alignment to their values. Now, you don't have to take my word for it. Here's a few people that have also transformed through my coaching, and here's what they have to say.
Amrit is a fantastic coach.
In a few sessions, he got to a depth that I'd only experienced before working with certain medicines.
He's gone through a lot of the struggles that you're probably facing.
Then my corporate banking job wasn't really doing it.
You feel like you're not making progress towards your goals.
And Amrit's been a really strong, supportive figure in my journey.
I'm more in control of myself.
I'm kinder to myself.
I actually have that vision and a purpose.
I do feel like I'm a better version of myself already.
Amazing energy.
He was easy to talk to, which made me easy to trust him.
Working with Amrit at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and really I was bouncing out of bed.
Whenever I get off the calls with Amrit, best money we've ever spent.
I would not recommend him because I don't want everyone to know about him, and then I won't be able to book him. If he gets too busy, I won't get my turn.
I would say absolutely.
There's no way you can work with Amrit for a period of time without being transformed.
So if you're considering him as a coach, do not hesitate, because you won't be disappointed.
As you guys can see, there's a lot of people all over the world from all these different corners experiencing incredible transformations. I don't think, if I can say humbly myself, that there is anything quite like this somewhere else online. Most people that, have channels that, grow and grow and grow don't really focus on one-to-one offerings. I have just found that it is the most profound space where you can bring yourself in a private container and really just share what's going on for yourself. And if you want to book in for that call with me, touch base, it's www.amrit.coach/life. That's www.amrit.coach/life. There is a link in the show notes below to book in that call. And if you want to take your journey further, if you want to dive in deeper, and you really want to live a spiritually aligned life, if it's for you, please do check it out. And without too much further ado, once again, for your spirit, for yourself, today's podcast. So then lies in, this point where my deepest curiosity goes to now, because I've been open to the path, I guess, is probably the way to describe it. This relationship, when we start diving into self-inquiry, for me at the moment, and maybe you can help me navigate some of this, it seems like there's a bit of a hallowed ground with this gentleman in there, and it doesn't have to be a gentleman for everybody, but for me it's a gentleman called the witness. Yeah, can you speak to the witness, the role of the witness? Is it meant to be a bit of a hallowed ground? Is it a stepping stone? Is it, the relationship of witness in this path of self-inquiry? So in order to inquire upon the self, there needs to be a witness present, maybe just framing it up for those that are tuning in. And then building a relationship with a witness. Obviously, in some moments, it's easier to invoke the witness and just have a look at what's going on. But those moments are further and fewer in between at present. But I'm imagining, and this is just my imaginations, that as I continue to crack open, hopefully the witness is ever present to some degree. And the rest is just, like you said, you can watch the thought pop up, pop down. Am I getting something right?
Yeah.
Or there are probably bits that are wrong. Just
totally. No, you're right on. Yeah, you're right on. So within the context of my work, because I speak so closely about the Kundalini awakening process, this is the paradigm and the language that I like to talk about. I'll put it this way. The nervous system needs to be acclimated to be able to hold the state of witnessing at length. It's to do with the entire body. And so we may feel that this is just a psychological process or a shift in perception, abiding as the witness. But I want to invite your audience to expand that idea of the witness isn't this eyeball in your head somewhere. It's the entire body being present with what is arising in the body. Thoughts arise in the body. Did you know this? I'm sure you did. I didn't know this because for some reason, for a long time on my path, I thought my head wasn't part of my body. So it was like two different things. So the witness is non-local, and it can be a witness to the full body, to the soles of the feet, the sensations there, the tension, everything, the breathing in the belly. It can be present for all of that, including thoughts. So thoughts are just another part of that can be witnessed. And the Kundalini process, as it brings things up to be healed and released, old pent-up trauma and what we may call a blockage in the chakras and all that stuff starts to come up and surface. As it's released, the nervous system gets more and more the ability to relax deeper and deeper into presence, which allows the witness to become more sustainable throughout our day, and it doesn't get shaked so much, and we don't get drawn into the identifying with the body and the mind so much. So eventually what happens is that witness, the idea of separation collapses, and we see that the witness and the content of what is being witnessed were never separate. They were not two. And this is, of course, non-duality. And so this is the next place that we may come, as we see that the witness, paradoxically, and this may be difficult to articulate, I can admit it's difficult to articulate, maybe difficult to understand, but a witness and a thought are not separate either. It's the same thing. That has to be understood and realized through practice. For some, it may happen spontaneously, but for many, it happens through practice. Abide as the witness long enough, and eventually you'll see that you were never not abiding as the witness. The witness was always there. It was just, you weren't aware of itself. The witness wasn't aware of itself. Awareness wasn't aware of itself. But as you move more and more ahead on the journey, awareness becomes aware of itself. The witness becomes a witness to itself. And from there, the beauty is that the whole effort can be dropped, because on some level you see it's like, I've always been this witness. It's not that I'm trying to go from being my mind and the ego to something new. It's like I've always been this witness. And then from there it becomes more and more established as a new way of operating.
the effortlessness you're describing is, yeah, truly inspiring. I've heard it shared a few times by a few different individuals, yourself included. And yeah, for me personally, with my makeup, it just seems to be what draws me in a really big way. Yeah, just the effortlessness of being and being present to all that is. It sounds sublime, but also at the risk of sort of doubting it, not to just reminding everybody that, yeah, cracking open is also quite a challenging process, not for all, but for many. Yeah. And all of that to sort of say there is so much to the process. And I'm sure we've just scratched the top of the surface today. Brent, if it's okay, I'd love to do some more podcasts with you in the future. In the meantime, for those that are tuning in, if they want to check out your work, you're obviously raising awareness of Kundalini. So kundaliniawareness.org is there for everybody to tune into. But also they don't have to, well, plot along on the path on their own. You're available. You coach people as well. So there is that intimate experience. And we talked about the importance of transmission as well, touch wood. I know you're super humble, so it's less likely that you're going to tout or invite anybody along to that. But I think it's important for people to just know that that's available to them if they are on the path. Yeah, does that sort of sum up where you would invite people to find out more about your work if they are feeling and digging this conversation and want to go deeper?
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much for the support. Yes. BrentSpirit.com is my website. And of course, there you'll find everything that I have to offer. I've got a 70-part series dedicated to the Kundalini awakening process, talking about all different types of experiences, challenges. I've got interviews with other people that have, had some pretty interesting journeys. And today, Amrit, our conversation has been really great. We've touched upon some parts that I haven't really got to dive in with anybody. And so I'm really grateful for that. And I just want to let people know that there's so much more to be said about this process. So please check out the rest of my channel there. Of course, I can also let you know about my podcast, which is the Spiritual Awakening Show, which I will have Amrit on there very soon. And we're going to go very deep. We're going to switch roles. And I'm very excited about that too. And so the new initiative that I have is kundaliniawareness.org. And so kundaliniawareness.org was birthed out of the need for bringing attention to this process that we've been speaking about so far. I described this energetic shift in my mind, which made the world very spooky. There have been other shifts in my body that made all sorts of emotions come up to very, like, I mean, I cried for weeks and weeks. Intense stuff was coming up, and I'm not the only one. In fact, it's happening to more and more people, and it's not a problem.
Yeah, nights where you had to sleep on a towel and stuff because of the sweats. Yeah, sorry, I'm interrupting.
Yeah,
sorry, please.
No problem. Yeah, I was sweating all night. My blanket was, I just said, I'll just sleep in a blanket. I'll just sleep in a towel. So I traded in my blanket, but it's happening to more and more people. And I don't say that it's happening to more and more people as if it's like more and more people are becoming sick. No, more and more people are awakening, but it's very difficult because we don't really have much clear material out to support each other about this. So kundaliniawareness.org has some definitions about this process, has a list of the signs and symptoms, but most importantly, there's a directory of licensed professionals, psychologists, psychiatrists, psychotherapists, counselors, social workers that have direct experience with this process, that are willing to support others going through this type of process as well.
And not just hand you a mental health checklist.
Right.
At the door of the... Sorry.
Exactly. Yeah. And so this is where it came out of. No, that's okay. This is where it came out of. It was just because I don't want other people to be in a similar place to where I was at. And so we can look and we can see, look at all of these people. They are the people that diagnose people as being mentally ill. And yet they're saying, well, I had this experience myself and I'm not mentally ill. So there's something going on here. We're not crazy hippies. There's something real happening here. So that's the directory. So if you're a licensed professional going through this kind of stuff, please connect and then submit an application. As well, there's a collection of stories of individuals sharing about their awakening journeys, their Kundalini experiences. So we can put together some well-written, proofread, organized collection of stories where researchers and others can look and say, wow, there's so many people going through this. There's something going on here. There's a pattern. And this can, of course, shift the conversation a little bit further, because so many people are just very lost, very confused. They think they're crazy. Can't talk to many others about this, because how can you really tell somebody that this explosion of a snake energy up your spine, and now you're in this far out meditative space of consciousness? It's like, what is this person talking about? So we're trying to just raise awareness, and I'm trying to do it in a grounded, rational way, relying on some smart people to walk with us on this journey together. And so I really am so appreciative, Amrit, of you having me on the show here. Not so much to raise awareness about me and my work, but to raise awareness about this process, about Kundalini awakening. So many people are experiencing it, and I just hope that they can figure out what they're going through, and then be on their way, and of course, give their gifts in the way that you're doing here. So thank you.
Touch wood, Brother Bear. Thank you so much for, just the, there's a better word than statementship. There's a better word than champion. There's a better word than guide, somewhere in there. And I'll get there probably when my head's hitting the pillow tonight. But also, just the way you're carrying the support, the light for this work, and just championing it and supporting others and guiding into their path, on their path. Yeah, man, it is such an incredible gift and a blessing to receive. And for me, it just speaks volumes upon volumes, just how much, just ease and grace there is. There's no, and that was one of the things that I love the most about your work, amongst so many things. There's just nothing's being shoved down anybody's throat at any point. There's not even an invitation. It's just like, hey, here's what is. Come if you will. Come if you want. It's up to you. Just the way you're offering support to people is a real blessing, in my humble opinion, and just raising awareness for Kundalini awakening. And even for people like me, that Kundalini, being of Indian heritage, has so much baggage around the word Kundalini. And the term awakening from the West actually has less baggage, and I was more open to it, feeling into just, your work has helped me reconcile a lot of things, opened me up to a lot of things, and it's been really, really beautiful part of my process. So I want to thank you for that, but also I could just thank you for today's conversation, brother. But, it is, like you said, the hero's journey, not just cyclical, but spiral that informs what you've gone into to inform the conversation that we've had today. So just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge you and you being on this path and sharing yourself so abundantly here with us today. So thank you so much, Brother Bear, really. I
really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Guys, links to everything that Brent put out today in the world will be put into the show notes below for you guys to go check out. Humbly do request that, you find your way over to his YouTube channel. The videos there are short, snackable. Some of them are longer in their nature if you want to dive deeper, but profound nonetheless. So if you are curious, I think it's a great place to start scratching that itch if you feel so called. All right.
Thank you. Thank you.
I had a couple of questions I was hoping to just sort of pepper your way, if that's okay. Texts, you mentioned some texts, and I love the way you're approaching the conversation around texts being transmission-y. A couple of texts that you'd recommend by any chance that I could sort of just start to pick open?
There's one that comes to mind. It's called The Spiritual Awakening Guide by Mary Mueller-Schutan. And she writes about Kundalini along with the conditioned layers of reality. And it's a very accessible book, not like dense or difficult to get into. She writes in a very accessible way, and it's quite recent. It's maybe within the past decade or so. So it's like really fresh. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is because one day when I was going through this, I found myself, the flow took me to the bookstore, and I just pulled this off the shelf, and I'm holding it, and it's just vibrating in my hands. So that was really powerful for me. I know you had Matt Kahn on your show, so Matt Kahn's work as well. When I got his book, I couldn't even read it because it was just too much. It was just like, I just hold it. I was like, I don't even need to read this. I just hold it. So there's that. Um, what I find is that I feel like you're already aware of the books, and many people are. I think when we're in a state of being receptive, we just start to feel it, and it's there in Tolle's work too. His work was, when I opened that, it was like just blasting me open with this transmission of presence, you could say. So Mary Weller Shutan on KundaliniAwareness.org, I have some other books that are speak to this this question here. There's a resource list, but there's a great teacher as well on YouTube. His name is David Sparrow. I think he also is very radiant as well. David Sparrow. He's not yeah, Spero. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've come across
Even
him
on the
before.
videos, there's just this transmission happening. I could perceive it. So it's another teacher to look into as well. But there's this great work by another psychologist. Her name is Joan Harrigan. I'm putting together an email for you here. I'll send this to you. So she has an organization called Patanjali Kundalini Yoga Care. And I mean, she's like a colleague of Bonnie Greenwell. I mean, there's only like 4 or 5 of these people anyway, and they all like, you know, they're buddies.
Know each other.
But yeah, so she has, she comes from a lineage that's about 500 years old from India. She's like a woman from like Tennessee in the States, but her guru is like from India, and her guru, she tells a story of like in her previous lifetime, her and her guru knew each other, and so she went to India and they meet each other, and this guy's like, oh, hey, it's good to see you again. And so they start working together, and they formed this organization, Patanjali Kundalini Yoga Care. Now, she has 2 books out. One book tells a story of 20 people that went through Kundalini awakening process to fulfillment, is the word she uses, to fulfillment, to a state of oneness. And in that book, interestingly, I don't think there's even one depiction of like this explosion of energy and all this stuff. She's describing these very subtle awakening processes, and she's the most astute Kundalini person that I've ever come across in this space. And I don't think that it's quite arguable. If you read those books, she's speaking about the energy channels and the chakras in ways that I've never seen anywhere else. And she's brilliant. And she's not sharing stories of these explosions of the energy and stuff. And so you can check out her work as well. I'll give you one caveat with her work. Not a bad thing at all. It's a good thing, I think, is that she describes not just Kundalini rising, she describes 20 different types of Kundalini rising that different individuals have. And so if you're familiar with the energy channels in the body, there's the main channel, which seems to be coinciding with the vagus nerve, Sushumna Nadi, up the spinal column. And then there's 2 that sort of intertwine around, which is Ida and Pingala, the other 2 nadis. Ideally, stereotypically, the awakening of Kundalini moves up Sushumna and it goes to the head. But she says, well, actually, in some cases, it enters into Pingala, it enters into Ida, it gets stuck, it gets diverted, it stops at the throat, or there's different ways that it unfolds, and each of those ways bring about different qualities. Some may have like this, they may become a genius. Some may become open-hearted and very peaceful and about service. Some people, it's just like gets into the quote-unquote wrong channel, and they're just like jammed up and like they can't leave their bed and they're all messed up. So she writes about these different types. However, she says, do not try to diagnose yourself. It's too tricky. You don't read this book and try and diagnose yourself. Come to us. Tell us about yourself. We'll work with you and we'll see what type of awakening or rising you have. And from there, attend a retreat with us and we'll support you. It's just so individualized and so specific that they don't publish it openly in a book. It's the same reason that the Tibetan Buddhists are so secretive about this stuff. It's just so powerful and can be dangerous if people are doing the wrong practices and whatnot. So she says, basically, come to us and we'll help you. Now, that's great. The problem is their work got so popular that now their wait list is 3 years. And so what happens is people read this book and they say, oh, it sounds like I have a diverted rising. I need help. I'll contact them. And they're like, 3 years? Like, what am I going to do? So in my work, I don't know anything about diverted risings, and I don't know. I just trust in the intelligence of Shakti. And I say, if you create space, it will correct itself. And I've seen this sort of thing happen. It just corrects itself. If you do self-care, you trust, you surrender, everything just works out. But for some, we are meant to go and work with somebody like her and get very specific instructions and guidance. And I've connected with people that have with success, and she may say, okay, you've got to do these types of asanas, this type of pranayama for this many cycles, and do that for 3 days, and then we'll do this and that, and she knows what she's doing. She's incredibly skilled, but that's the only caveat I would say. Great material, just don't let it give you anxiety.
Yeah, dope. Thanks for that qualifier, bro. Is pranayama and yoga, along with meditation, some of the key ingredients? Because I still feel very up here. Like, you described head, body, separate. I don't feel separate. I've got a great awareness from the podcast that we are one system. But my body does carry a lot of contractions that I ignore. Not ignore, but like don't address. Is probably the better way. I don't ignore it, but I don't address. And it just comes from, 2 little kids, like just running around doing things, busy life, and I'm just not. I'd love to be able to spend a day just foam rolling out and, doing practices where I just dive into the breath and things do soften and loosen. But yeah, they build back up again. And so that to sort of, just open up, because I guess I've been in a place recently where I've just been inquiring more and more around. Also, I'm probably just because I'm getting older as well. The body asks for different things. So starting point, how important do you think pranayama and yoga are to being supportive on this process? Because it seems like a lot of the people that I speak to, a lot of the people that I speak to that are in the space of awareness that I associate yourself to be carrying are often yoga teachers that are teaching pranayama. It's happened like in all 4 instances, actually. And so then I'm like, oh, but there are other people, but the people that are actually actively teaching people the process seem to be teaching them pranayama and then also giving them satsangs on this matter. There are other people that are then just living day-to-day lives that aren't doing it. But I was just curious about it.
Yeah. So for me, if you have a practice that makes sense for you, it feels right, your body's saying, this is good, I'm getting benefits, continue with that until that changes. But if it doesn't feel right, you're like, why am I doing this? It's forceful. It's giving you like, you're feeling all like head rushes and weird stuff like that. I would say just stop. The reason that I say that is because with awakened Kundalini, once this begins to awaken, it actually even knows how to do pranayama. It may just happen to you spontaneously in meditation. Just start breathing, it just starts happening. And it's exactly what you need because that's what the body's doing for itself. So that's what I would say about the pranayama specifically. There's a lot of great stuff with breath work and that sort of thing. I would just say, unless you are really in touch yourself, it's good to work with somebody who you tune in and can say, this person can support me if the practices they're telling me to do bring something up really intense. They're not going to be like, oh my God, I don't know what to do with you. They're going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, this is normal. They're experienced, they're confident. Some people can do a breathwork facilitator course maybe in a weekend, and then they teach it, and then somebody in their group has like a huge upheaval of trauma or a huge energetic explosion, and they're like, teacher, help me. And they're like, I don't know what to do with you. And that can cause a big problem for that individual who's going through that. So find like, teachers with confidence, with some experience and whatnot. And if I were you, if you like the breathwork stuff, I've done this myself for yoga teachers. I just grill them and just ask them, do you know about Kundalini? Do you know about this? Do you know about that? And they'll say yes or no. And then I don't judge them for it. I just say, okay, I know what their scope is. So I know what I'm getting myself into here. And then I just tune in and see, does it feel right? Or is it something that I should, maybe just move on from? When it comes to yoga, generally speaking, from what I found, yoga is pretty safe to get in the body. It's not going to like stir up all sorts of crazy stuff, I think is useful and effective for addressing, like you said, the contractions in the body and the muscles and whatnot. Very, very effective. But even for me, it wasn't pivotal for me on my journey, yoga, like an asana
Not
practice.
necessary. Okay.
Yeah. I did a yoga teacher training after I had this Kundalini awakening, actually, just to make sense of what the yoga people were talking about. And to be honest, what I found was that they're not even talking about this. They're just talking about exercising. But yeah. So one thing I would say is that when you practice meditation, for me, my meditations now are all about becoming aware of any tension in my body and where I'm holding it and just relaxing it deeper, and then scanning it and going deeper and releasing it, and just keep body scanning and going deeper, and just, oh, there's a little tension in my leg, just release it and release it and release it. And that actually is very effective for this type of work. That's what I've found, is training the body to relax, just training it to be relaxed. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. That makes me exactly where I'm at, brother. Thank you so much for that.
Great. Oh, you're welcome.
Because even when you brought up the nervous system in the podcast, I was like, yeah, it's such a profound point. Because recently I've even just been noticing the inspired evolution could just be the inspired nervous system or inspired vagus nerve evolution. Like it's just, it seems to be at the heart of so much of our internal processes, especially with like just how neural and cerebral the world is. It's just like, just come back, just come back in the body, bro. And it's just like, yeah, the nervous system is like just this, it's like like just learning to modulate back in to a healthy state. Yeah, seems to be, I don't want to say a silver bullet, but actually, yeah, I feel like at the moment it is a bit of a silver bullet for just what's going on around us.
For sure. I mean, it coincides. Yeah, it coincides with the Sushumna Nadi, right? It's the same. The vagus nerve it can be mapped right onto the Sushumna, and so I mean that's fascinating to me.
Yeah, I love your awareness of just how it's all interwoven, interconnected, and just the softening. And yeah, I think, and at the risk of putting positions like this, but I think it's interesting because when I'm speaking to someone like yourself top down, they're always espousing, just stop pushing and trying so hard. From the bottom up, it's like, yeah, but and it's not lost on me. It's like one of my dearest friends who's working through a process on herself, and she's guiding me a little bit, more than a little bit, I should say. She's in a particular space where she's cracked open, and we're talking a lot. And the minute I'm speaking to her, I can notice it's holding a lot of space for me to witness how much ambition I have, and how much my ambition it's a beautiful thing in many ways, but at the same time, it's also causing contraction. Yeah. And then also recognizing that, okay, but it's woven so deeply into my personality that even as she's talking to me, similar to what we're discussing in the podcast, her state is like an ambitious place for me to get to. And then like, I'm trying to use ambition to get to the place. And this is where I was talking before about the mind, using the mind to get to where it's going to. And I was like,
okay. Yeah. No, this is very common, right? It's very common, especially for those with a masculine disposition, right? It's ambition. It's go get it. And I think practicing embodying the feminine within ourselves, I think it's effective as well, because like some of the most important things, like I was saying, they don't require our ambition. Digesting food that's a feminine process. It's totally passive, and so there's great power there as well. And there's a Dr. Kavita Chinayan. Maybe we'd like to get her on the podcast. I don't know much about her actually, but she's got a book called Shakti Rising. I haven't read it, so I really don't know much about her at all. But I read very briefly. She's got a conversation on Buddha at the gas pump. She said, Kundalini isn't necessarily the explosion. It's actually the force that it becomes awakened the moment you begin seeking. That's what's drawing you to seeking. And I thought, oh, okay, that's an interesting way to put it. It's so much more subtle than that. The moment you become a seeker, it's actually because your Kundalini has begun to be awakened. So something to think about as well. So many different ways of looking
really
at this.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's really beautiful.
And so we will get you on my show. We can discuss it more, but just generally speaking, is there anything that you're passionate about speaking about?
Yeah,
it's a spiritual awakening show, so pretty much anything goes, really.
Yeah, so I'll share with you what my awareness is, and it might be a bit too crude. Yeah, I'm going to explain it this way. So the way I've been trained or learned, we've got the 4 levels of consciousness. Life is happening to me and I'm a victim, or life is happening by me and I call that person the achiever, level 2, or life is happening for me, which is level 3 consciousness, the flower, the surrenderer, and then level 4, life is happening as me and we are one unity consciousness. So all of that to say, I perceive your body of work being between level 3 and 4. Right, cracking people from I'm surrendering, and then how do I am it, my body of work actually lives between level 2 and 3 at the moment. People have been achieving for a long time and they're finding that meaningless, and then they go, shit, how do I surrender? How do I find my purpose? What is my purpose? And that sort of stuff. So oftentimes when I'm on a podcast, the title of the podcast is called Live Your Purpose. I mean, I'm an engineer by qualification, so going, hey, what are your core values, like your deepest core values? And those are the sort of the avatar that you've assumed, the personality that you've got, the ego that you've got. It finds the greatest sort of satisfaction on a deeper level, fulfillment-wise, and it is connected somewhat to your purpose of being here if you can line things up in alignment to your values, because at the moment you're just operating off of everybody else's fucking values and it's driving you mad.
Right.
So it's not, hey, let go of everything, where we're kind of at with your conversations. It's like, okay, before we get there, let's stack things up that actually align to you and your personality, and allow, the way I describe it is your core values are the pillars of the temple that is the personality that is you, and the life force energy flies through that. So what are those pillars? Let's get clear on that. And then let's craft things. So for me, it's connection, contribution, celebration. And in podcasts, I get to connect, contribute, celebrate. As a coach, I get to connect, contribute, celebrate. As a public speaker, I get to connect, contribute, celebrate. So at least my ego and my personality, and maybe you can argue that it's more of a trap in this conversation, but at least it feels gratified that at least the time I'm spending here on earth isn't just spent doing what everybody else wants me to do, and it feels somewhat fulfilled. And that's the live your purpose, live spiritually aligned conversation that I love having. And in around there, I sort of poke people to a sort of lead magnet, which is like, just at least fucking discover your values, please. Like, takes you 20 minutes.
This is brilliant and very pertinent for my audience, because what happens to people is they go through this very far out awakening and they're like, I don't know what to do now. It's probably top 3 challenges. They're just like, I'm different and my job doesn't work for me anymore, or I had to leave because I was having such an intense awakening process, and now I feel ready to go in the world, but it's like, I don't know what to do. And I often tell them, I often tell them, few of us are meant to maybe be an author about spirituality and write a book or be a YouTuber. Many of us, it's like you live your purpose in so many ways. It doesn't have to just be a spiritual character, right? And so that's about the extent of what I can share with them. And then I do share, I'm like, you try different things, you follow the flow, it takes a life of its own. It's sort of the path reveals itself. But for me, I can't speak too much to those topics because I don't have a family. And this happened to me very young, very, very young.
Yeah.
So I never established any career or direction. I've just always known that I'd be moving and doing this stuff. I was a photographer, which I guess I still am, but photography was like my little career while this work began to solidify. But I was never...
Sorry, I wanted to ask you on this podcast, I hate to interrupt because it's an important conversation we're having, and you're basically getting to a point where it's like, yeah, you can help some of my people, and that's a good point. But nonetheless, just to say, sorry.
Yeah.
And I do want to help them. But adopting the identity of a spiritual teacher at a young age, bro.
Yeah.
Did you have any
yeah.
hang-ups around that, man? Like, what the fuck?
Around the time that this energetic explosion sort of took place in my head, and I, experience of no self, I couldn't see this ego, this mind was gone, the sense of Brent. I began an anonymous Tumblr blog online, where I was just writing about what I was experiencing, and words were flowing through me in a sort of interesting way. It was like I was channeling, you could say. It was like automatic writing. I was just writing about the state of consciousness that I was in. And it was not this type of stuff you hear from me today. It was very much in alignment with what you may find with people that are into non-duality, Neo-Advaita, talking about awareness is all there is, emptiness is all there is, that sort of thing. But around that blog, people started to pay attention, I guess. And then people started to ask me questions. Hey, can you elaborate on this point? Or here's where I'm stuck. What can you say? And so I started to respond to these questions. And from there, the questions were just rolling in. And what I found was that I would just have to sit down, look at the question, and just start typing, and something would come through. Sometimes it would be long, sometimes it would be a one sentence, and it just started happening like that. And then at some point, somebody was like, hey, can I meet with you on Skype? Back then it was Skype, not Zoom or Riverside. It was Skype. So somebody was like, hey, can I meet with you on Skype? I can give you a donation. I was like, what do you mean? So I talked to this person on Skype about the state of, awakening that I was at that time. And, they sent me some money, and I was like, what the hell? And then someone else asked, and I thought, okay, maybe I'll, put a little page here. If you want to meet with me, this is, I asked for a little bit of money. And even today at this point, I say, if you can't afford it, please let me know. I'm happy to meet with you. We can work something out. And so like that, I started looking around and saying, I'm doing what all of these people that were writing the books that I was reading were doing. I'm a spiritual teacher. It's like, okay, this is strange, but I don't know what else to call myself. I'm offering spiritual teachings. So that's where this idea of like being so young and saying I'm a spiritual teacher came from. It started there. Then later on, I was able to discern between, thanks to Ram Dass, I was able to discern between this idea of guru and spiritual teacher. So Ram Dass says, I'm a teacher, my guru is a guru. Neem Karoli Baba Maharaji, he's a guru. And there's a difference. And he says the difference is the teachers, like, just sharing what they can from where they're at. The guru, they're the full thing, the full complete package. And just them existing is a teaching. So I thought, okay, I'm not a guru, and I'm really not a guru. I'm a teacher because I'm just sharing what I can with other people. And sometimes I connect with people who are perhaps even more advanced than I am on the journey. It's just that maybe I have something to articulate in a way that they haven't heard before, or can speak to them, and that's about it. So that's how I sort of came about in this role of spiritual teacher. It also is effective for me in establishing a little bit of boundaries within this work. For a short period, I was trying to just say, hey, we can be friends. And because I didn't want to say I'm a teacher and you're a student. So I was saying, we can just be friends. And then what was happening was people were like, hey, can we talk on the phone? And I'm like, well, I'm kind of busy. And they're like, all right. And then all these people were trying to just, I guess, take up my time. Yeah. And then I was like, okay, I can't be friends with these people that honestly, they're on the internet and that I don't know. So I had to then, reestablish and say, I'm a teacher. These are my boundaries. If you would like to have a conversation with me about what you're going through, I just ask that, you go through the channel that I've created, which is, my meetings with people and whatnot. And so that established some boundaries around that. I would love to be friends with everybody, and it's great when we can do that. But as this work grows, I think boundaries, they're necessary and important. I'm sure you can relate with your coaching as well. I'm sure you've got so much to share with your close circle, and you may come across people that are so awesome and you're like, man, we could really hit it off. But this is a professional exchange as well. It's a service, and that's just the way our society operates, right?
Yeah, it's yeah, I do run the risk sometimes of becoming an anti-capitalist, and just how much time is coupled with money. You know, I've got some stuff around there which I have cleared out, but then also I do remember affectionately when I was a vigilante. So,
yeah, me too. Yeah. I was a punk. I played in a punk band, and our thing was we'll do it all ourselves. We recorded the music ourselves, put the show on in my bandmate's house, you know, printed the CD, did everything ourselves because we just wanted nothing to do with the system. But of course, you look around at the punks now, and eventually they grow up, get a job, and it's just the way the system works. So that's how we have to operate, and even the spiritual teachings, and they operate in the same sort of system, and that's just how it is.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, bro. I think it's
no problem, man.
I love how organic the process was for you. And I think, you know, I can totally relate with the Inspired Evolution. It's been similar. The first time I got asked to coach, it was just a guest someone on the podcast, not a guest on the show, but one of the audience members was like, will you coach me? And I was like, coach you? What? Like, just have these conversations you're having on the podcast, have them with me. And I was like, I could do that, you know, and then started doing that. And then, you know, one of my first coachees became the person that secured my first public speaking engagement for me. And then it just sort of all just tumbled out of there. And I've just been going along with it ever since. And it actually feels kind of nice doing things that way. I think, it's a bit messy at times because you're sort of wading into uncharted waters and you're kind of like, trying to sift things out. But it also is, it's not super stretchy, it's not very, we talked about ambition, and it doesn't have to be so fiery to get where you're going. There's a lot of surrender in the process as well, which is actually kind of beautiful. Touch wood.
Yeah, and this is a conversation that I would love to have with you on our podcast, the Spiritual Awakening Show, because I think it's this type of coaching that you're offering. The message about coming into alignment with your purpose is very applicable to those on the path. So I look forward to that conversation too.
Yeah, dope. Thanks, man. And if there's anything I can do to support people on that path, that's my whole, purpose. So yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to ask me that question, see me, witness me, and see me on my path and see where it all fits in for you as well. So seems like there's a lot of yummy bits to collab on in this space. And so I just anchor that prayer there and allow you to flow back into your day. I'll flow back into mine. But we'll continue to stay for sure and in touch for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Man. Thank you so much for your generosity
thank you.
today. Inspired Evolution tribe and audience, you made it through to the end of another episode. Man, your inspiration to evolve is truly inspiring for me as your brother walking this path, walking home together by your side. Thank you so much for your blessings. If you loved this podcast, one of Brent's favorite teachers is Matt Kahn, and I did a podcast with Matt Kahn right here. You can check it out. If you loved this conversation, you will love that conversation with Matt Kahn. Check it out now.